This is where I come from, just to give you a bit of background. I was born in Birmingham, but grew up by the sea, always looking at the horizon, always knowing what the weather's going to be like, because of which direction the winds are coming from, what time of day it is, where the sun is in the sky against the horizon, looking beyond, which I think informs a lot of what I've done. I've had a good background in ecological management. I'm a landscape architect, derelict land reclamation. When I came to Birmingham, I moved to Birmingham to try and understand why we think we can't teach design and how we can. And after the first article I wrote, Sir Geoffrey Jellicoe came to see me at his own expense, he said, to see the work of my students. And one thing led to another, and now I'm President of the World for Landscape Architecture. This is my executive committee our executive committee have 8 time zones. But the thing that underpins all the work that I've done is a book called Overlooking the Visual, which took me about 15 years to write, actually addressing that question. Why do we think we can't teach design and how we can? And I've been a bit shy about talking about it, but in the end I realised it's all about redefining theories of perception. So generally we think perception, the senses sense things and it's structured, form, crystallised, whatever you want, in order to serve intelligence. So I'm suggesting actually, it's called all sorts of things: visual perception, the mind's eye, creativity, the subconscious, intuition, all of those things are black boxes, an unknown thing. So my assumption is that is just a philosophical misconception, and we don't need to deal with that. If you take that out, then all the problems of trying to reconcile the irreconcilable disappear, and you can actually teach design. So it provides an alternative, going from this, which is the Manchester Method of Landscape Evaluation, huge research project that fell to pieces in the 1970s, just when they realised that the quantitative revolution wasn't all it was cracked up to be, to the opposite side of the same coin, which is thinking that if you walk around with your eyes closed and let things happen to you, then you can actually reach into the depths of creativity. So it redefines the design process. If you have an interpretative conception of perception, it redefines consciousness, the design process, and of course the landscape. A different way of looking at landscape that's not based, so rather than thinking that it is nature conservation, that it's the physical context that we have in national parks and forests and all the things that we associate with landscape, gardens and allotments, to actually begin to think that the landscape reflects our memories and values. It's the sense of pride that we share in the places where we work and live. If you think about where you grew up and how much that shaped you, then that gives you an entirely different way of thinking about landscape, one that's very, very powerful. So the landscape is about ideas, and it's the expression of these ideas that shapes the quality of our experience. It's all about aesthetics, really, but aesthetics in a different way from the way that we usually think about it. To understand this requires looking at the narratives that you hear from your grandparents, or you learn from school, or from your neighbours, your parents, to understand things that happened through the centuries, how we use the land and the places that we live in over a year or a daily cycle. So partly this has informed the work I've been doing with the University of Auburn from Alabama. So Birmingham, Alabama and Birmingham worked together to get these kids from Whitton to think about the river. They knew that their school flooded, but they didn't know that the river was just around the corner. It also is influencing work at an international level in that it underpins the work that I'm doing for an international landscape convention with UNESCO. And it's all about actually realising that it's this relationship that we have with the landscape is so powerful and so valuable, whether it's an everyday ordinary landscape or Stonehenge, whether it's in Salford where I worked, or Birmingham or Thurrock. The everyday ordinary landscape is the thing that's as important there as it is in Australia or New Zealand to the Aborigines. The other thing about this new definition of landscape is that it gives a way to cross disciplines, to cross boundaries, and to begin to address some of the global challenges that we face to do with demographic flux, disasters, for example. It's as though we've forgotten to look at the land, but if we really begin to think about the land in a much more fundamental way, then you wouldn't really build nuclear power stations on fault lines. If you look at Tewkesbury a few years ago, if you wanted dry feet, you went where the monks lived. They knew where it was sensible to live. Because we think we can do anything, we have the technological prowess to do anything, we do, even though it's not necessarily the sensible thing to do. It helps us to think about drought in a way that these global challenges don't stop at regional or national boundaries. So, this is of interest to all sorts of United Nations agencies because it helps them deal with the divide normally made between science and art, nature and culture. It is informing educational and professional policy, such as this definition that went to the International Labour Organization, and it's actually informing the development of European and international education across the world. And it underpins the work I've been doing for quite some time, looking at large-scale regional design. And I realised that in terms of this new definition of landscape, it's actually about raising aspirations. We were told this was going to be a new water quarter for Salford. I don't know if any of you come from Salford, but everybody fell about laughing then because they thought there's no way it's going to happen. It's so grotty, it's so awful. But of course it did happen, and it's not perfect, but it's a transformation, because we had a 25-year strategy to change it. It's also about realising how much quality of the environment impacts on the quality of sustainable development and can be used to attract inward investment. For example, East Side Park is £11 million to develop, and now £131 million coming in. So, HS2LV, I went to the City Council and said, this project, if you want HS2 to come in and you want it to happen well, then you need to employ me for 2 years. And they didn't. I was taken out for a cup of coffee every 2 weeks for 6 months. But we managed to begin to realise that there's a different way to deliver infrastructure that's a multidisciplinary approach. It uses a different economic model that is not to do with just the minimum cost of getting it done here and there. It requires a completely different set of governments where stakeholders aren't just talking to each other, but actually working together to achieve a vision, an agreed vision, so that they share the costs, share the risks, and share the profits. It's had all sorts of regional support from HS2, from the DFT, from the National Trust. There's a whole list of people there who are excited about it. And partly it's about actually looking at this huge infrastructure. We've got this massive valley system. Most people don't know that it's there. Birmingham, Solihull and Coventry on the map. Understanding its history, understanding the legacy that's there of the problems that we've had over the years, understanding what the social, economic, educational and employment stress is created by the fact that you've got this huge lot of infrastructure wrapping around the city that cuts it off from the valley beyond and separates the city. So I began to map it out. This is at 1 to 30,000. Think, well, if we could change it, what could it look like? And this went to the Secretary of State, Patrick McLaughlin. We had all these. I created this fancy diagram, and then they said, he won't understand that, do a different, more simple diagram. But I'm showing many drawings because the drawing is very much part of the process that we're going through to begin to understand, and it's been really vital in actually getting people's engagement, beginning to think about what could it be, how can we use the fact that this huge project is coming in to address the agenda that's significant, jobs and skills, local food, entrepreneurship, trying to think about places for a different kind of urban living, storing water. We've got these two valleys, we've got more water up here than they've got down in the south. Beginning to actually think about it as being a major tourist resource, a major recreational resource, and absolutely to do with mobility and hitting the health agenda, thinking that we'd need to have bridges across the Tame and that so people can get in and out of this area that they can't get to at the moment, and actually creating a new identity for the region. The city boundary, this is the Blythe Valley, which is quite beautiful. The city's in the distance, thinking rather than softening it, we make it really dramatic. So we actually think of it as a city wall. So that's a really brief run through, but we're thinking about how HS2LV can lead and shape all these different initiatives with all these different stakeholders across the region, including employment, housing, health, tourism, food, environmental and cultural strategies, making sure that we don't actually that we actually work with other initiatives that are going on, such as the interchange in Curzon Street, thinking that actually the station might not be iconic. David Higgins, who's the chair of HS2, said, why isn't it invisible? Which is a bit of a thing to think about. So I've been looking at the station. Actually, this plan is using LiDAR data from the Environment Agency. And that little yellow blob in the middle is actually Curzon Street Station. And the pale blue that sweeps across is where you can see it now, based on HS2's own information. So it's actually thinking about how, with both the stations, how we can use them in a very progressive way to create the city that we want. If we have an agreed spatial vision about the city, then what would it look like, and how can we use this to sort it out, rather than put the station in and then try and tart it up afterwards, try and apply cosmetics to make it damage the city less than it was. That's an amazing view that's coming into Liège, but there's a fantastic view of Parkside as you come in, so that you actually begin to celebrate the city and begin to make people think, I didn't know Birmingham was like that. The station this is in Trafalgar Square. It comes into a station, but perhaps it should be not a skinny little station, but a great big station. Perhaps we should even think, as in Antwerp, how to stack the rails so that we have these places where people just go in and actually change their journey, go to the station to meet rather than just to catch a train. We're looking at, with my students, to think about how we can create new walks going across the city. The route from New Street to Millennium Point is particularly dreadful at the moment. Trying to think about how we could actually use the balancing ponds, which are seen as being a problem, actually as a real asset to create high quality ecological housing. How we can contribute, how we can at every point prioritise cyclists over cars and pedestrians over cars, and as well as use the buildings and the whole development as a way to display cultural strategies. So it is, okay, to wrap it up, a place to energise the city and adding beauty to the surroundings. I just want to say that we have, there's a national strategy for Mipim. We're working with the students who are all working on HS2. We've got a climate click student, one of the posters is up here. She's presenting at the moment upstairs. And there's a big interest in the drawings, with potentially exhibitions at the V&A and MoMA. Thank you very much.